Okay, everybody, welcome to today's webinar. This is PMO Advisory. We are recently a newly minted PMI authorized training partner. And today's topic is really about New Year resolution, 5 steps to advance your project management career. So here we'll do a brief introduction and look at a little bit of the New Year celebration and why people have New Year resolution. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the 5 steps to achieve what I think is advancement in your career. There are some sample resolutions. And now review a project management career ladder, which coincidentally I recently presented at the PMI conference in December, essentially about the same topic, of course, with a slightly different angle. So I hope everybody found that fun, and then we'll have some additional material at the end. So let's start with the question, really, of what is the New Year resolution? Why do we care? Why do we plan? And I think there are quite a bit of history to this entire topic. The history of New Year celebration started from the ancient Babylonians. People realized that at that time, with each passing year, there is the opportunity to do over, to start over. And I think, frankly, given the for I'm sure many of you a fairly difficult 2020, it is a good time to replan and to think about what can come in 2021. In 2021, promised itself to be a fairly good year for renewal. As I'm sure everybody followed the news, we have vaccines coming out. My older daughter, for example, recently was vaccinated. She's an EMT. So you could clearly tell that things are going to be different. The ancient Babylonian recognized this from as back as 4,000 years ago. They have the Babylonian Akutu, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, festival. And at the time, of course, people asked gods for favors such as debt settlement, good fortune, great harvest, and of course, any other of those miscellaneous things people like to ask. The Romans continue that tradition and in some ways into the modern time. Now, the Romans, of course, the original Roman calendar was formed using the 10 calendar, but around 46 BC, Julius Caesar introduced the 12-month calendar, which is really the Gregorian calendar that we are using today. The first of the American celebration of New Year and thinking about the New Year resolution came approximately a little more than 200 years ago. A Boston newspaper published the premier article about the New Year resolution. And for those of you who like history, which I do, we know one of our founding father, Benjamin Franklin, of course, is really the father of sort of self-help movement, I think, around the world, not just in the United States. So given the holidays, given the time of enjoyment, hopefully relaxation, and of course being safe, there's also time for contemplation. What do we want to do in this coming year? So this is one of the reasons that many of us have New Year resolution. Now, sadly, studies have shown that New Year resolution doesn't often work as well as people want. Most people don't necessarily stick to it. So what we have here is a 5 fairly simple steps to really help you design to help you develop that New Year's resolution and of course try to keep that. Couple of things that people should think about when they really think about the New Year resolution and just from a basic development perspective, right? A lot of people work in the world of operation, as we call it, meaning that you do the same thing fairly similarly over and over again. In some ways, if you have 5 years, people in operational roles tend to essentially do the same thing 5 years or 5 times. What makes project and project management more interesting, more engaging, more fun, frankly, is that chances are you're going to work on different kind of project. You're going to work with different people. You're going to meet different challenges. You're going to explore new areas. And if you do project well, chances are your subsequent project will likely be bigger, more complex, and sometimes involve more people, more money, more resources. Many companies, especially the larger Fortune 500 company, for example, they may even have project management title, project manager 1, project manager 2, project management 3, program managers, which a career ladder later we'll talk about. And with each of these levels, there is a corresponding level of accountability, responsibility, budgetary, for example, control. So what this is about in project management, I think, is really we are champions of change. By almost definition, projects are investment in the company future, which means we deviate from the current path. So as you think about your career path, think about your New Year resolution, think in terms of what do we want to learn differently? What do I want to pursue differently? What kind of project do I want to target? Do I want a new certification? And so on and so forth. Oops. So some of the questions that people can ask, am I on the right track? Is the job right for me? I recently worked with a number of people who seems to be stalled in their current track. They may enjoy what they do, but they probably don't want to do it 5 times more, right? So that is a question. I know also 2020, for most of us, frankly, if we can maintain our job, it's probably a pretty lucky thing. I know a lot of people who have great amount of hardship. But here, now is the opportunity to think, what do I want to happen in 2021 and even beyond? What is my next challenge? Is it because I want to deal with, for example, cross-functional project, work with greater number of stakeholders? If you're working in the IT industry, maybe you want to move parallel into another developmental area. What is my next step in my career? Project management traditionally has been what I call a very steady but a moderate growth career. When I say moderate growth, you don't usually zoom suddenly in 3 years get to become the senior vice president of the company unless you work for a startup. But the progression of the steps are very steady. Large companies value project managers who can work across different divisions and functions and get things done. As a matter of fact, in management literature, some of you know I also teach, we call project manager boundary spanners. They exist on the edge of multiple organization boundaries, especially the enterprise project managers. And so what is that next step? Is it bigger project, more complicated project, more control, working with particular vendors, technology, companies? Other question people can ask, what am I really good at? In project management, and by the way, this is in professional life, I firmly believe you progress because what you do well. What holds you back are your handicap. So the flip side of the question, of course, is what am I not very good at that's holding me back? Chances are you get promoted, you get the working on more complicated project because there's something about you that does really well. But as your boss or others contemplate whether to put you in that role, maybe some handicap you have. Maybe you have a temper. I have a poor temperament, by the way. That's something that I don't know if it held me back, but I know it held me back personally as I grow, even though I don't think career-wise, I try to hide that fact, of course. Right? So those are things. Do I need a mentor? Over the holidays, I finished writing my latest book, which is on Pgmp, Success Guide. And I thought about all the people that helped me along the way. And in the front, I wrote a page and covered and mentioned by name a couple of my mentors that helped me in my career. I am extraordinarily lucky. I have mentors even today. And these are the people that, frankly, serves as a good reflection board. They tell you a voice of reason, right? Advice, giving me advice on, T, you're too full of yourself. Control your enthusiasm. Other times you don't work hard enough, or you haven't tried hard enough, or you should demonstrate your eagerness more. And that's how people move forward. What have you achieved so far? Are you proud of what you achieved? Do you want to achieve more? Do I have clear goals for my career? Sometimes goals doesn't have to be specific. Goals can be directional. Directional goals, for example, would be right now, let's say you just earned your PMP. A directional goal is you know that the next logical movement from project is into large programs. So you want to be a program manager, but you don't know how to do that. Your company may not even have program management structure and processes. So it is not something that's going to fall into your lap. But instead, you could start thinking about how do I encourage my company and push them and navigate them toward using program management for that large set of initiatives, strategic initiatives that are highly related. The program structure seems to be able to provide real, true values and synergy. So those are other questions. Work-life balance is really, really important. Money, passion, convenience, whatever matters to you the most, right? Those are the questions you ought to ask. And sometimes what's holding you back in your career? I think there are things, all of us, none of us are perfect, right? Like I said, I had a bad temperament. And for my closest friends, I still remember my best friend when I graduated from college, warned me, T, you can blast off sometimes, right? Take a deep breath and think twice before you say something you regret. And by the way, I have not always followed that advice. So there are things I do regret. So when you look upon these things, and given that none of us are perfect, I thought of this 5 relatively simple steps that can help us as we plan out our career. And by the way, it doesn't have to be New Year resolution. Of course, you could do that anytime. Step number 1, be focused. I recently read a great article, by the way, and I think it's from Warren Buffett. But the article summary essentially is there's one thing you could do to advance your career more so than probably any other traits. Now, I don't know if I really buy into that, but it is on the topic of focus. According to that article, what Warren Buffett felt the single most important skill is the ability to say no. And really sat back and thought about that. I like to be an agreeable person. I like to be well liked. My wife joke about that with me all the time. So how many times do I do things not because I have to, not because it's important to me, but because I want to satisfy somebody else, or because I don't have the ability to say no. Focus. And of course, I know the idea of focus for a very long time, but that article really made it sink in, the ability to say no. So the number 1 step here is figure out what you want to do, hone in on that, and focus on that in such a way that the other parts of your life you do are helping you to achieve that particular goal. And don't work on too many things. 1 or 2 things is good enough in a year. Frankly, most of us, hopefully, with some blessing and COVID-19 withstanding, are going to have a longer and more productive life. Right? That's always the hope. So there are time. And if you could improve that 1 or 2 things a year, multiplied by next 30 years, that's a lot of things. Now, one thing I do urge people is, of course, even though you want to pick 1 or 2 things, make sure it's stretch. Not to the point of breaking and it's impossible. I always joke that I like to hike and climb small mountains, but at my age, and I'm, believe it or not, I'm 50, going to climb Mount Everest or any really top hill is probably, I can't say impossible, but probably out of reach or outstretched. On the other hand, if I want to visit the national park, especially we like to go to Acadia National Park, and this can be, not the highest mountains on the East Coast, but it is a part of the Appalachian Trail. There are beautiful hikes and hills and little mountains you could climb. That is doable. So one of my goals, not necessarily climbing, is to do that with my family. So step number 1 is really focus, the ability to say no, the ability to establish stretch goals that you can meet. And when you meet them, you feel proud. You feel that you worked through it. But don't stretch so far that is impossible. And by the way, the idea of stretch goals is quite simple. If you, let's say, stretch a little bit and you meet that, your next goal could be a little bit more stretch and a little bit more stretch. And there you build your reserve, your ability to really quite stretch. So in some ways, maybe nothing is truly impossible. By the way, I welcome people to jump in with questions, I should say, because otherwise it may feel like a monologue. So feel free to jump in if you have thoughts, if you have experience, things you want to share. The second is plan. Plan here is now you have your focus, you have your objectives, right? Create a reasonable plan that accounts for the potential problems along the way. And really think about what are the few things you need in order to achieve those goals. Very few goals are completely in isolation. If you want to climb a mountain, for example, you probably need some equipment and know how to use the equipment at that. If you wanted to pursue a certification, right? Let's say Pgmp. Well, it's worthwhile to check. Do you check all the boxes of the qualification? So come up with a reasonable plan that accounts for the potential problems. Planning is considered a primary management activity. There's actually only a couple. The primary management activities are plan, organize, execute. And then sometimes people put a fourth one in, control. Right? So it's depending 3 or 4 on the model that you use. And when we say prime is you pretty much, and you can't say 100% anything in life, of course, but let's say 99.9% of the time, you probably want to do it because it's a good idea. Now, one thing to avoid in planning is also planning for the sake of planning. And you get a point of planning paralysis. We call it analysis paralysis. So what I always urge people to do is do plan, but have a bias toward action. Because unless you start the first step in your journey, you actually don't know when things really go wrong. You could have the most beautiful plan in the world. Imagine you're planning a road trip, right? You plan to drive from, I live in Jersey, so from Jersey to California. But let's say you don't have a compass, you don't have GPS, you don't have a map. And you, even though you start planning out and you do all the analysis, but until you start driving toward that direction, that's when you start knowing, oh, I'm heading the right direction. So don't plan so excessively that it stops you from action. The third part, engage. Engage to start working toward the goal right away or within the few days, as I mentioned before, to avoid paralysis analysis. When you have enough to take the next baby step, take it. By the way, this is the essence of agile, if you think about it. What is agile? Agile is being adaptive. Take a baby step, look around to see how things are going. If things are not going well, so you just wasted that sprint. And if things are going well, you could build upon that. Now, chances are with most things in life, you're probably not all wrong. So if it is an agile, you didn't actually lose the entire sprint. You just may not maximize or optimize what you need to achieve. So by looking back a little bit, take baby step and maybe next step even a little bit bigger than that, and so on and so forth, you can start marching to your goals very quickly. Procrastination is perhaps the single biggest enemy of achieving your goals. When you think about this, one of the reasons often for analysis paralysis, you could say, well, maybe I need more data. I need more information. I'd like to have better insights. All of those may genuinely be valid, but at some point, they also become excuses for not moving forward. So that's why between the step 2 and 3, plan and engage, there needs to be a proper balance. Plan enough, have enough clarity so you could start taking the step, but it is probably worthwhile to start moving. 4, adapt. Few goals can be achieved without some change. And this is true, especially in project management. Many of you work on large project knows. It really doesn't matter how much time you spend planning everything up front. They usually don't survive the first major problem or issue or risk on the project, meaning there's going to be some change. As a matter of fact, I'm right now working with another professor. We're collaborating on a paper, but one of his famous paper is, plan on nothing changes everything. Now, he's not saying planning isn't important. Of course it is. But don't be so full of planning thinking that this is the perfect roadmap. One of the analogy I read from the Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. He later wrote another book, First Thing First, I think. Inside he used a really good analogy that stuck with me. For example, when every commercial airline need to fly from point A to point B, they file a flight plan. And the flight plan, of course, clearly indicated when they're going to take off, which route they're going to take, how high they're going to fly, and ultimately get to a destination. Of course, the minute the plane takes off, or even before that, for that matter, very few of them truly stick to that flight plan. Rationale? Well, things get in the way. There are birds, there are other planes, there are weather patterns, and not to mention other type of emergencies. But ultimately, for the most part anyway, they do get to that destination. Right? So this is where every flight probably had to adapt along the way. And that is true for your plan as well. That is true for your plan for career development. That is true probably for any sizable project. It's important to monitor the progress and adapt to the changing environment. Some of you may, for example, plan to complete Pgmp in 2020. Well, and I hope you know the reason why you probably should have done it 2020 is because PMI is updating the Pgmp, and as of 12 days ago, they have a new exam. And the new exam is frankly harder. In my view, it's harder because it has 50% agile. It didn't have it before. Not to mention they reoriented, if you look at and compare the examination content outline, it's a complete different orientation. But let's say you didn't finish in 2020 and you still want to achieve that. Well, guys, let's adapt. Because fundamentally, project management is project management. Nothing changed between the December 31st and January 1st. It is still the same discipline. Yes, you may have to look at it a little bit differently. And instead of thinking learning new agile as a burden, which I'm sure for some can be, on the flip side is now you get to learn a new discipline. PMI has great agile practice guide. And if you fully understand the agile practice guide, that's probably more than good enough to pass the new exam. This is not to say you'll get 100% of the question, but you'll probably be doing pretty well. So adapt around the plan. And then finally, I always think a good things to do is celebrate. Pat yourself in the back when you achieve small milestones. Even that baby stretch goals, if you achieve that, that's something worth celebrating. You have to be kind to yourself. One thing I found, especially in this pandemic year that we had, and of course we're now out of the woods, so this may still be a pandemic year, is that we tend to be too critical of ourselves. We are ourselves' biggest enemy. So in that sense, reward yourself, even for small goals, small accomplishments. If your new goal is to lose a couple pounds, celebrate for every pound that you lost, or maybe every 2 pounds that you lost. Because if you're not being kind to yourself, frankly, who else would? And one of the things I used to joke is I teach in universities, and one of the definitions we talk about, how do you establish milestone? And I talk about my days when I used to manage fairly large project at KPMG. I used to be the global director or elsewhere, right? I design milestones, really, I jokingly say, as an excuse for celebration. It's an excuse to get the team together, take a deep breath, celebrate what we have achieved, maybe not champagne every single time, but definitely be happy about it. And you have to be kind to yourself as you go along this journey. So that's it. 5 fairly simple steps. And really focus. Remember the ability to say no. That's something that I just learned. Plan. But don't make the plan so detailed or so immutable that it becomes inflexible. get to a good place that you can start engaging and moving that next step. And check along the way. If you made a mistake, if you didn't go in the right direction, you found yourself having some kind of heartache, so be it. So's life. Try again. Right? Go back to the plan and engage again. Adapt along the way. You're probably not going to get things right the first time, probably sometimes not the second time, but it's the journey that matters. And then celebrate and be kind to yourself. Let's look at a couple of the New Year resolution that I thought were, good and worthwhile mentioning. Richard Branson, get unbelievably fit so I'm ready for a trip into space. I'll be doing lots of trekking and biking to get me into that top shape. And I finished the Virgin Strive Challenge in 2016. I feel like a 25-year-old again. I haven't felt that good in 40 years. And I'll also be doing some centrifuge G4 training, so I'm as acclimatized as I can for the journey. So think of people very successful, continue to look for the next challenge. Melinda Gates, one of my favorite person. She focused on picking one word for each year. I found that this to be more successful than setting a more traditional resolution. Because instead of prompting a radical change in behavior, it encourages a gradual change in mindset. Last January, I chose the word gentle, and I spent 2016 trying to put that into practice, being gentler to those around me, gentler in my approach to the world, and most importantly, gentler to myself. Now, I know this is a bit outdated, but I think being gentler in 2021, at least for me, resonates very well. So I thought about that as one of my goals. Being kinder to people, to my students, being quite critical sometimes of them, um, and sometimes to people I work with. So let's look at a career ladder. Now, this is a conceptualized one, but I do have to say it follows my career pretty closely. And I broadly broke it into entry level, skilled, expert, and executive, very similar to the presentation I did for PMI in December. And at the entry level, you have really the titles around being a team member, a coordinator sometimes, an analyst, a junior project manager. As you develop the skill, getting into, let's say, 2 to 3, 2 to 4, 2 to 5 years of experience range, going from junior manager to project manager to senior project manager. Most people at around the skill level is when they pursue, for example, PMP, and later I'll map to it. Beyond that, you're getting to now more the experience and some point expert level. This is when you start managing larger projects, more complicated project programs. PMO sometimes gets involved at that point, and ultimately into portfolio role. So I actually grew up from this. I remember when I started out college, I was working for Nabisco in their learning and development department, developing technical training for the organization. And technical training is actually machine training. Nabisco is a big manufacturing at the time of making cookies and crackers. And I still know how to make, by the way, a couple tons of cookie, at least in theory, per hour. And I was working on a project, and by accident or chance, my manager one day was sick. I went to the project meeting, did a good job. And the next thing you know, I started working as a project coordinator, project analyst, instead of just being a technical writer that I started out. And did that pretty well. Eventually, Nabisco sent me off to China, believe it or not, when they were expanding back in the 90s, internationally building new bakeries. So I was in Indonesia, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. So you can see I look Asian, so I do speak the Chinese language. And that was why I was sent overseas. And there, being a 25-year-old, frankly, carrying suitcases of books and video at the time, it's quite outdated. The going around the bakery talking about how good manufacturing practice from the US helped them, etc. You really start managing pretty sizable projects. In Beijing, there was a major bakery expansion joint venture. in Suzhou, which is right outside of China. It was a greenfield bakery, as well as in Indonesia. So setting up training was really exciting time. And then I thought, I really need to learn project management. So that's why I went to Accenture and became a project manager. Also focusing on training project manager. I've been doing training since the mid 90s. And from there, I continued to grow. I started managing business process project, IT project, manage a large program. One of my first program was Consumer Reports, 2002. They wanted to rebuild their consumer reports online with a new engine, a commerce engine, new product, and we want to get it ready before Christmas. And by the way, by the time they started, it was only 4 months earlier. So it was just getting everybody ready to manage my first program. My second program, by the way, unfortunately had a very famous day, 9/11. It was at Standard & Poor's. I was a program manager for the integrated internet web consolidation. And the launch date was 8 a.m., 55 Water Street, which is about a mile from World Trade Center, on 9/11/2001. So sadly, I witnessed that from the kickoff meeting. My back was to the World Trade Center at the 31st floor. And from there, you build your career. Eventually became portfolio managers, managing large PMOs at KPMG. And in some ways, in the corporate ladder, I never really became a chief project officer. The most I became was the head of a very large set of portfolios and PMOs. But now I ran my own company. I could give myself any title I want. So I thought, might as well give myself a chief project officer title. And I do have clients in which I help to build not just the project program portfolio, but also the executive view of what project ought to be. So this is a conceptualized ladder, but it's really my ladder. I do follow this, not exactly in this linear fashion. I remember, for example, where I was at the KPMG managing portfolio. Portfolio is really political, and I'm not a political person. So at some point, I just got tired. And I remember making my lieutenant, asking one of my lieutenants to manage a portfolio. I actually went to direct a large program just to feel alive again to some extent. And so you started going in and out of these roles. That's your choice, right? And if you look at the certification, one thing I have to say I like PMI is because they give you really good certification that guide you along this journey. Very few business profession have this kind of certification that matches your years of experience and your aspiration. Entry level, I encourage my students, college students, MBA students, consider getting CAPM. Once you are able to get close to the PMP, don't get CAPM. Wait for a couple of years, get that leadership experience, and go for PMP or ACP or something else. And here you can see even some of the specialties. At the expert level, program. I think program is really the next frontier in terms of the general mindset of projectized organizations. Very few organizations, in my view, does program and portfolio well. And that's why most of my writing, most of my books are actually in those areas. But that gets you to the expert level. So if you start mapping the career into the certification, you could see that it maps pretty nicely. So in addition to the 5 steps journey that I talked about, as you think about the New Year resolution, think about where you are and where you want to be. And by the way, it is not linear. You could jump around. The reason, for example, why my company PMO Advisory offered PFMP certification, and by the way, that was our first certification course. Most training companies start with probably project management, then PMP, and then move up the ladder. We went the other way. We started with PFMP because in 2013, and when I started, I was an early adopter for the PFMP certification. And right now, by the way, at the time I was number 8 in the world to get the PFMP. As it turned out, I'm now number 4 because other people didn't renew. So now I'm the 4. And by the way, I'm also the first person in the United States. So if you pull up the credential library, you look at it, I'm actually the first person to get it in the United States at this point. That's still active. So I'm sure there were people before me. When I did the PFMP and got the certification, I remember on May 11th, 2014, PMI informed all of us, the early adopter, who got it, and there were 121 of us. And it was a very small crowd. I had my analysts look at the 121 people profile and just to see, what they do. It's just out of curiosity. And at the time, PMO Advisory was a consulting company. And what I learned was that out of 121 people, 59 of them, almost 50%, 59 out of 121 didn't have any other PMI certification except PFMP. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Why is that case? How do they even heard about PFMP, to be honest? I mean, you have to really be an insider to even know about it. Now, chances are there were project managers. But what I learned and started looking at those 59 people profile, I realized that those are people who are project professionals, probably had PMP sometime in their career, just didn't renew. But they're also head of different departments, PMOs, or leading large teams. And one thing insight, I spoke with a couple of them. One insight that I derived at the time is the reason they strive for the PFMP is because they're managing a lot of people who already have PMP and they didn't think having another PMP just becomes sort of a me too, right? They were looking for differentiation. And that's how we actually got into the training business because of that insight. So that's what I have in terms of the storytelling, but the 5 steps to build a better and stronger resolution as you look for growth in 2021. Before we go, just a couple of quick notes. PMO Advisory, we are PMI ATP, Authorized Training Partner. And these are courses coming up. You could see them. We actually also plan to do PMP, but we're still waiting for some information. And I have an onboarding meeting with PMI coming up anyway. So we haven't put out any official dates, but you could see the courses for elsewhere. If any of you are interested, please let us know. Sorry, I should have said 2021. As a specialty, special discount for anybody attend here, you qualify for a 10% discount. Just use Web10 as the coupon or the reference code, and you could get 10% off to any of our classes in 2021. Here are some of our recent publications. As I mentioned, I actually just finished writing another book I sent to the publisher. It's the same publisher that published Optimized Project Management, and should probably come out later this year, and that's a Pgmp success guide, very similar to the PFMP guide. So those are some of my work. Other than that, claiming PDU. Now this is not quite an hour. It's about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. So you have to be honest, you may not be able to claim the whole hour. But if there are questions and we get into the hour, and we do have 20 minutes for questions, feel free to use the chat or jump in with your question at this moment. But this is the claims code for the 40 or 45 minutes, depending when we finish. Other than that, thank you, everybody. Happy New Year. Hope 2021 is frankly much better than 2020. If you have any questions, please jump in now. And if you need any of our information, any of the link to our courses, that is here. So let me pause here. Oh, I see there's chat. Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Doug, we don't normally distribute our slide, but I'll make this available. In probably 3 days, if you check the PMO Advisory, the last link here, webinar page, we will put this video, recording of this video on, and I'll have a link to this deck. So we'll get that both. Any other question?
Hi, Charmaine.
Hey, Charmaine, how you doing?
How are you?
Good.
I hear echo is probably on my side. Sorry about that. So with the pandemic, I was just curious to know whether or not you've heard any buzz about how the market is doing from a portfolio management perspective, whether or not, companies are having a greater need for portfolio management or a PMO? I mean, especially when they have to take a closer look at their investments and what projects they can do and what they can't do and prioritizing, etc.
Thank you, Charmaine, for the excellent question. I have to say I have not heard anything definitive. And it is a point of concern because with the pandemic, and this is a couple of my consulting clients we talked about, in some ways, I don't think within reason, none of us really could predict it, the degree of shutdown in business activities because caused by the COVID-19. Um, and one of the best way, or at least one of the better ways to plan for these unforeseeable events is through portfolio management, which I'm sure you would agree. Because what portfolio help organizations do, at least at the more advanced level of portfolio management, is set up scenarios. Um, a general advocate that I have for all my clients on portfolio management is set up at least two, maybe three type of portfolio. In other words, you set up a portfolio is a group of projects and various investments and components for the business as you currently see it. So let's say business as usual. But we know that economic disruption happens. So ideally, you should also set up a second one for what I call relative worst case. Something were to happen, economy turns south, um, competition for whatever reason flare up, and that causes that you have immediately a backup plan you could go to. The third scenario I generally advocate the clients to do is a relatively good case because you also want to leverage opportunities. Risk by definition don't come in any particular fashion. So those are sort of the three portfolios that I always advocate: the business as usual, the relative worst case, and the relative best case. Now, none of those would have covered the pandemic, but because of the disciplined portfolio management helps company to really plan and having literally trigger point analysis, looking at these and activate certain plans that are already built, that enables them to react. You could see that in work. For example, China in the beginning of the last year in January, they built two hospitals in Wuhan. Each of them within 10 to 15 days. These are a couple thousand people hospital, right? Logistically, it's just unimaginable to build a hospital for 1,000 people in 12 days anywhere, right? How did China do it? Well, if you look at the lessons learned, they learned from the last pandemic they had, which is SARS. They already developed contingency plans, portfolio analysis or scenarios, and they said this scenario happened, let's pull and do that. Unfortunately, I don't see the world really adopting these lessons. And hence, I don't have a good feel that they are engaging more in portfolio management. And by the way, you would think risk management also would have a greater interest. But we don't see that in our firm as well. We do risk management training. So that's why I'm saying I am not sure. I do think when the dust settles and as company becomes more competitive, and generally the survivors of the pandemic will be more competitive, it is likely that these will have renewal strength, if nothing else, because people are progressively developing newer skills. But I don't see that in the immediate. So I'm sorry, Charmaine. That's how I see.
Thank you.
Sure. Let's see, there are a couple questions that come up and I'll quickly answer them for the ones online. Raymond asks, what are your thoughts on disciplined agile? It's a really interesting question. Thank you, Raymond, for asking that. I was having a conversation with my company's agile specialist, and her name is Susan Parante. She sometimes presents webinars as well. She's a fabulous person, knows a lot. Susan recently shared an article with me, and the article essentially highlighted, and to my surprise, that there are over 250 agile certifications out there. That is a very big menu. To be honest, I don't know if it's doing the world a service when it stands at 250, meaning any of us, unless our company is already adopting a particular method, right? What's the chance of us having the ability to just even tackle a very, very small sliver of those 250? If anything, it causes confusion. That's one reason that I actually like ACP, because it's a general agile certification. Discipline Agile, of course, is a company that PMI acquired, I think about 4 years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, and they are pushing very heavily into it. The last I checked in terms of the market share of Discipline Agile, I believe is only around 3 to 5%. It's not very high. Now, of course, 3 to 5% among 200 choices is probably not that bad either. But the sort of the big elephant in that case is the Scrum. The various Scrums are by far the biggest. So I don't know what to really think about Discipline Agile. This is a question that I ask regularly. As a PMI ATP, I'm authorized to give Discipline Agile lessons. And clearly you don't see in my calendar. It's because to me, the 3 to 5% is rather small. And also given that there's just a flood of other Agile discipline out there and certification, I'm not sure that it is something I want to pursue at this point. If anything, I actually wrote a book, somewhat not anti-Agile, called the Optimizing Project Management. This book came out in May of last year. It's published by Taylor Francis, sorry. And it makes an argument in the book that we should get back to sort of our basic in terms of understanding and taking a more consulting approach, asking the 5 whys and how as we tackle project. To me, Agile, any of the Agile, is a natural evolution. In project management, we talk about tailoring all the time, and that is true since the early days of project management. This is not a recent development. If, let's say, we are working on a web project that requires a constant refresh of functionalities or look or feel, it naturally gravitates toward the Agile. So you would have, using the consulting understanding and methodology, come up with a particular way of implementing those kind of projects. On the flip side, if you're building, let's say, the high-speed rail train between, bullet train between San Francisco and LA, frankly, there's not much agility to it. I mean, unless you make the stop every single mile, right? You have to build enough for the train to be safely passed from one point to point B. So to me, all of these methodology, and I call it a proliferation methodology, almost like a Chinese takeout menu. You go there, you got like 200 choices of different beef, and you probably faint along the way. McDonald's menu suddenly becomes so simple, right? That's my problem with the entire space in project management. So what I wrote this book partly as a response to say, instead of chasing after the latest and the best methodology, and I'm sure it works, I'm sure it's very good for the scenario they're in. We're talking about thin slicing to such a degree that I'm not sure it is truly relevant for most professionals anymore. So that's my thought on, by the way, all of Agile for that matter. Gary asked the question, what are the main key differences between Pgmp and Pfmp? That's a really interesting question. I recently wrote an article on our website. And for those of you who know me, I am a quasi-researcher. I'm a quasi-academic, but I'm also a practitioner. And the difference between Pgmp and Pfmp comes down to what is the difference between program and portfolio. Program management, and I'm going to flip to our company website. I just published this not too long ago. This article, and you could just go to PMO Advisory, go into blog, and you'll see it's one of the top 3. It attempts to define program in I would say, a more structured fashion and a little bit more rigorous than a lot of the loosey-goosey definition, including PMIs. PMI definition call it a collection of project sub-programs and other components that is delivering value more than you could deliver by managing those initiatives individually. But I hate to say this, isn't that the definition for management? in period. Forget about program management, right? The minute you apply some management discipline, you want to derive more value. So a program, in my case, are something that needs to be a lot more tighter. The centrality of their goals and scope has to be tighter. So program management is, think about, let's say you're um, an executive in charge of building a new store, right? Chances are building a new store needs a couple projects. You need somebody to do the renovation, somebody to do the design, somebody to figure out what merchandising, how things are going to be laid out, somebody to set up the sales process, somebody to hire the new employees, train the new employees, some marketing for the new store. Each of those in its own right are a good project. But if you hire the new people and the store is not ready, well, you're just paying them, comps for no good result. So what makes a program is these things has to be tightly integrated and come together. That's what makes it a program. And it is this tightness, what I call a concept I call the centrality of the objectives, that makes a program a true program. Portfolio, by the way, is almost exactly not quite the opposite. It's just when the centrality is very loose. A portfolio is usually built around strategic goal, let's say producing new revenue. And opening store is a good project, but so is coming up with a new product. So is reaching out to a new customer segment. So those fairly loose, even though they strive towards the same common objectives. So there are linkages, is what makes it a portfolio. Now, portfolio in project management does bring you closer to the senior executive level because it is the body that makes investment decisions. And also prioritize them, also coordinate the resources. So there's a lot more, I would say, the capacity capability analysis. And for those of you that's interested in that, this is a book that I published with PMI. I was one of the two main editors. There's 8 of us who contributed to this book. And by the way, 8 of us is a small team of the 11 of us who wrote and helped PMI updated the current standard for portfolio management, the 4th edition. So when we finished that project, we created a lot of materials. We said, well, instead of throwing it away, let's see if we could rehash it and put together into a useful book. And 8 of us came together and put together this book. So I think this was published in 2019 or 18 in May. So still pretty recent. My suggestions, take a look at that. So in short, for people who are continuing, want to manage project, think of yourself wanting to be a captain of a bigger ship, then Pgmp is ideal for you. On the flip side, if you want to be an admiral who doesn't really manage a ship anymore, but manage the allocation of the ship and where the ship ought to go to, that is portfolio. Okay, so captain, Pgmp, admiral, PFMP. Thank you. I got some personal message. I really appreciate it. Jenny wrote, for your role in consulting as a result of COVID, how are you seeing the PM landscape change? Really excellent question. I think the number one note to answer that question is digital project management. I don't think the world will be the same again. Even though we will eventually get back to some norm, but the new norm will be still quite different. One of the things that, if you're interested, and I have to finish doing that study, is I have a study out here somewhere, I'm looking for it, that talked about managing projects during a pandemic. So for those of you that's interested, I haven't published the full result because I'm working on another one. I'm always working on some study, but feel free to participate in that, and I should get that ready in about 2 to 3 month period. So I'll put the link here. And this talks about how projects are changing in the pandemic. Okay. Eldon asks, is for Pgmp or PFMP, is experiencing direct report required for certification? No, not necessarily. Leadership experience doesn't have to be direct reporting relationship. It could be a matrixized organization. Charmaine, thank you, Charmaine. Ray, thank you. How much for PFMP course, and is the course necessary? Truth be told, I think none of the PMI certification is something beyond your ability to study on your own. I think all of them are able to study on your own. So for PFMP, clearly you're able to do that. And especially because I think PMO advisory, what I'd like to see that we do is we provide help at every pricing point, right? For PFMP, for example, we have the book that you could buy on Amazon for like 50 bucks. Where's the book? Sensible Guide. And even if you buy the book, you could request for online access. We'll give you online access for the exam bank for 30 days for free for those 400 questions. So clearly you could do that. Our course starts at $11.99 for live virtual. And we often run some kind of specials. So get on our mailing list and you'll get the coupon code. This month, for example, I think it's 10% off, as well as for people who join this webinar. Okay. Yes. So one of the persons sent me a message, Pgmp equals to Admiral, PFMP equals Captain. No, it's the opposite. Pgmp, think of it as Captain. Think of PMP as a captain, just of a smaller ship. If you want to manage, let's say, a small armada, right? Then think of a Pgmp. You're just captain or whatever the next rank is of that entire group of battleships. But it's the admiral behind the scene that is often saying, well, this group needs to go here, that group needs to go there. And that is the role of PFMP. PFMP, for people in the portfolio management role, you're managing at a fairly high level. PFMP or portfolio management is sometimes defined as the bridge between planning or ideas and strategy with that of execution. And in order to make sure the execution goes well, you want to make sure that the team, whether it's program project, have the right level of responsibilities, right resources, right support. And the party that makes it happen is the portfolio manager sitting in between. Okay. Now, I think if you claim the PDU, it could be one PDU. It is now on the almost top of the hour. Which book or study guide will you recommend for Pgmp? To be honest, I don't think there is a good book on the market for Pgmp. That's why the publisher, for Taylor and Francis, who I published one book before, asked me to write another book, which I did, but it'll probably be a couple months before they come out. You could look at Amazon. I think Amazon rating tend to be pretty objective once you get into, don't look at ones with 1 or 2 ratings because that's probably their friends asking them to rate the book. But once you get to a good enough number like 5 or 6, they tend to be pretty real. And there are Pgmp books out there. I have to say, Pgmp is hard to study. It's one of the tests that I actually had to take twice when I passed the test. That's because I studied the wrong version. I remember the day before the exam, I found out, and this was back in 2010 when I took the test, I studied the wrong standard. PMI exam upgraded to the next standard, and at that time, internet wasn't that popular, so it was not like something I bought the book from Amazon, studied my heart out 2 days before the test, and I couldn't even cancel at that point, by the way. So I went to take the test, promptly failed it, and then I rebooked the test in 7 days, and this time study on my own the right way and eventually pass it. So you could pass on your own. One thing you may want to look at is we do make some resources available, even in the Pgmp on my website, for people to study, for those what I call the do-it-yourself. And we do make a small part, a good size test bank available to purchase individually. So for the do-it-yourself, the exam simulator. So the exam simulator here, you could talk about, there's a free test people could just use for fun. And then there's some fee-based that gets you about 600 some questions. So even if you don't go to our bootcamp, we still make the exam bank, a portion of it available. The largest bank is only available for our training customers. Okay. Now we're definitely on the top of the hour, so you could claim 1 PDU. Any other questions? If not, does the PMI have any plans to update the test for Pgmp and Pfmp? Really good question. I was in touch with PMI recently asking them when they plan to update their standard. Typically, exam updates come out about half a year after they update their standard. And PMI tends to update. I say tend, it's not a hard rule, their standard once every 5 years. This is because they are ANSI standards, American National Standard Institute. And ANSI is a part of ISO, so International Standard Organization. And I'm a US delegate on the ISO team, so I know that process pretty well. Long story short, right now, because of the pandemic, they're behind on everything. Originally, I was anticipating that they will start a new standard committee probably last year. So it's already in the past tense and will be ready probably in the beginning of 2022. So the earliest update will likely be in June 2022. But right now, I see that being delayed, to be honest. So unless you're really planning strategically that far out, within the next 12 months, I doubt there will be any changes. How much increase was Pgmp or Pfmp certification? Sorry, I know that was a direct question to me, so I didn't mention the name. There is no easy salary survey out there for Pgmp and Pfmp. PMP in the United States, I think, is about 27%, I think, but in the 20th percent. And by the way, these increases are not rigorously tested. These are convenience sampling. But having said that, the PMI goes to about almost 10,000 people in the United States. So the number probably has good validity. But Pgmp, Pfmp are too small. There's less than, slightly more than 3,000 Pgmp in the world. I think the last I checked is 3,002. And Pfmp is still way below 1,000. So it's not enough sample. I will say that at the point of Pgmp and Pfmp, the increase may likely be less because of the certification, but more because of the level and the role that you play in the organization. So in other words, it's not as much certification driven. Certification gives you opens the door to those positions. Now, coincidentally, in Saudi Arabia, one of my friends told me there's a large construction company in Saudi Arabia, and when people get Pgmp, they automatically get a 30% boost in income. But that's the only percentage I have ever heard, and it's for Pgmp, not for Pfmp. And it's only one company on top of that. How much time estimation duration needed study for Pfmp? I would say about 100 hours, give or take. And the 100 hours should be spent probably within, say, a 2-month period. So if it's a 3-month period, probably, especially if the density of time you spend on studying is less, then you may add up more hours. So the hours is somewhat less important than the effort, the concentrated effort you put in. We had a person who came to our Pfmp bootcamp many years ago, and the person came from a place that doesn't have PMI test center. So he literally booked the test right after taking the bootcamp with us, was a day apart. At the time, our bootcamp was 3 days. So he went to bootcamp Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, studied the hell out on Thursday, went to take the test on Friday and passed it. But he also did some homework ahead of time, and he literally devoted that 4 days completely to study. So in some ways, you could argue he only studied maybe 50 hours in those 4 days and passed it on the day 5. And did a pretty good job. He passed every one of them with at least moderate proficiency. So it's a concentrated time that matters, in my view. You rather, I think 2 months is good because 1 month is too rushed. And 3 months is okay, but beyond 3 months, might as well try to find that 2 months or 3 months you have, dedicate your attention and study and pass it. And that's true for any of the tests. Minor exception is PMP because it's just so big that you need to have at least 3 months. So all the other ones, probably a month to 2 months will be ideal. 2 months is almost ideal. Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope everybody have a wonderful year. Be safe, obviously, and then get cranking with your New Year resolution. 5 steps. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Doug. Bye-bye.